All right,
Um,
you just tell me when you need me to switch and we can go.
yeah, we're just going to do a little intro from me and then we'll get into Andrew's um, very important speech. Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. Right, Andrew, can you go to my next slide?
Sure.
Um,
There's a question. We will share the recording and the resources with everybody. So if you want to take notes, by all means, take notes, if that helps you. But then we'll share all the materials at the end as well, plus recording, video, additional links, things like that.
yeah, I'll go into that. Yeah, you'll get the recording. You'll also get links to the studies that we mention and any other resources around impact and bone mineral density and bone quality. Okay, briefly, because I realize there are a lot of people on the call who may not have worked with us before. Wild Strong aims to bring people together outside to sort of connect with our bodies and with each other, which sounds a bit odd when I write it like that. But what we mean by that is that we want to build capabilities so that we can keep doing all of the things that we love as we get older. Andrew, can you go to the next slide, please? To do this, we offer a selection of sort of outdoor classes, in-person and online courses, and training tools, all focused on building strength and skill and connection at community level. Okay, next one. And this is just, we can add this slide in most of our, I think this is from Katie Bowman actually, but we just this idea that we age into the shape of our habits. So anything that you can start doing today goes into this kind of movement bank account for later. And it's never really too late to start any of this. It's just about finding an appropriate entry point for you. Okay, next slide. So today we're really looking at building bone mineral density and quality using impact. So we'll have some ideas of how you can use that at home. This is only an hour and we do want to leave time for a Q&A at the end. So there's not, you can't go into too much detail, but we want to kind of give you an understanding of the why and the how and a little bit of how you can get into it. And at the end, there will be lots of links for, further reading or watching or listening. Um, okay. Next one, Andrew. So today we're looking at the big picture, what the research says with regards to upper and lower body impact training, how impact actually helps bone mineral density and quality, some takeaways, some kind of general rules of thumb, some movement options for you to start thinking about, and then some common concerns and troubleshooting that often comes up. And then we'll have time for Q&A. If, as we go through this, you have questions, do feel free to put them in the chat in case you forget them, and we'll try and answer them at the end. There are a lot of people on the call, so we'll hopefully get to most questions. Okay, Andrew, next one. We come to this slide a few times, but with all of this stuff, particularly with impact, you want to take your time and start really small with an abundance of caution. Um, Impact progress occurs over months and not days or weeks. Um, don't increase intensity, volume, frequency, and complexity all at once. You want to take one thing. This will start meaning more to you in a minute. And just at the end of the day, we really want you to take your takeaways to think about where you are now and how you can gradually start progressing this. And finally, don't confuse impact training with conditioning. So by conditioning, we mean kind of cardio, huffy puffy stuff. Um, Andrew, next slide, please. Okay. Big picture, very zoomed out. And again, we will be sending around the research for this, but a lot of us our bones need more stimulus than a lot of us give them in our daily life. We know that bone loss begins in midlife and accelerates after menopause, but also bone loss happens with men as well. But 1 in 3 women over 50 will experience a wrist fracture, mostly from a foosh, which is a fall from an outstretched hand. I'm sure that many of us on this call will know somebody that's broken a wrist or have broken a wrist on this call. And if you do have a wrist fracture, then it really increases your likelihood of later in life, 10 years later, having some kind of hip fracture as well. So we know that stronger bones equals fewer fractures and increased stability and confidence to continue doing all of the things that we enjoy doing in life. So that's kind of where we've zoomed out from. And now we're going to go back in. Andrew, I think it's over to you. Oh, no, it's still me. Okay. Good news is it's not that complicated. There's a lot of noise on social media about all sorts of stuff. And it can seem really overwhelming, but we know that bones are living tissue and that they adapt to stress throughout life. And we know that there are two really effective ways that you can build bone mineral density and quality as we age, and they are progressive strength training and impact training. Um, Most of which can be done at home or in the park with your friends if you don't want to go to a gym. And there's just a huge amount of research, particularly for the lower body impact and strength training. So we have some really, really good guidelines, and it's not as highly complicated as it might seem. Next slide. There we go. We talk about this a lot. We want to lose the wood from the trees. We want a bit of progressive strength training, a bit of impact, and some balance and movement skill. But on top of that, you can keep doing all of the things you're doing. So if you enjoy doing yoga, you enjoy doing Pilates, you enjoy going for walks, you enjoy gardening, keep doing that. We just want to show you that you can start building in little short sessions throughout your week that will have measurable impact on your bone mineral density. Okay. So while we don't want to get too bogged down in the weeds, we do want to look at a bit of the detail of how impact does affect our bones. And I'm going to hand over to Andrew with
Okay.
that.
Can I get the spotlight?
I think you actually maybe already have it.
I
Maybe
don't,
hang on a minute, I'll put it back
don't,
on you. Add
yeah.
spotlight. Can everyone see Andrew?
You host a spot read your video for him. I can't see myself though. Uh,
Well,
I can see you, which
I've
is
got some
great.
thumbs up. I've got some thumbs up from people that
Okay.
can see
All
you.
right. All right. Well, I'll just look at what you're saying. Okay. Um, can I do it? Oh, I'm gonna try one more chance just so I can see my video because it's easier to. Can I? Oh well. Okay. That's fine. So, yeah, the good news about talking about things like this is the quality of evidence has gotten very good in the last 10 years or so. Um, Basically the direction of science and research has been moving the same direction. There's a lot of things that we were pretty sure we knew. A lot of things that we had hunches on, 10, 15, 20 years ago regarding resistance training and impact for bone density and bone quality. But really, in the last 10 years, we've had some really great papers, meta-analyses, interventions that have come out. And it's one of those things we can say without any kind of caveats or, hedging that yes, we know resistance training is very good for bone quality and bone density. We know that we can do it appropriately, even with older adults, postmenopausal women, people who have already been diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis. There are safe ways to do it. And then we also know now that impact training is going to be a really big part of that as well. So if you wanted to log off right now, if you've heard enough of this, my takeaway would be do a little bit of resistance training and then do a little bit of impact training. They're very complementary and they have different benefits in terms of bone quality and density. So there you go. You can head out. Talk to you later. I do want to talk about this idea of fragility fractures. And it's funny because whenever we use the words like fragility and
Well,
frailty, what's up? Oh, hello?
it's
All
all
right.
right. I'm just getting everyone to mute if they can.
Okay, that's fine. So whenever we use words like fragility or frailty, it's because those are words that are in the literature. Those aren't words that I necessarily would use if I'm talking with members in our community or things like that, because nobody wants to be labeled as frail or fragile. But they are terms that are used, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with them. So one of the things that we I want to talk about right now is really just making sure that we're all on the same page and we have a common language. So before we start talking about impact and resistance training and exercise and things like that, we just kind of we set the stage so we have an idea of what we're talking about. So the first thing I want to talk about are these idea of fragility fractures. Um, and these are injuries that likely wouldn't occur in people with stronger bones. So generally, a good rule of thumb is a fall from roughly a standing height or position. So, if you are someone with healthy, dense, high quality bones and you fall from standing height, chances are most likely you are not going to break your wrist or your femoral neck or something like that. However, as we get older, both men and women, more especially women, especially post-menopause, and we start losing certain markers like bone mineral density, your chances of getting an injury from a fall become much higher. And sometimes we'll hear people use this word sentinel injuries, and sentinel injury can be used in different contexts, but it's an injury that can sort of be a proxy for something bigger. So Jill already mentioned this idea of the foosh, the fall into an outstretched hand, um, which is, as Jill said, there's a correlation. If you are someone who, if you have some kind of fracture in your distal radius or your wrist from quite a low fall, that could be an indicator that you have low bone density or bone quality. So the most common fragility fractures, there's a few different ones. There is the femoral neck or the hips. So if we look at that first one, you can see the femur where it goes into the pelvis. Um, it's worth defining this one because sometimes people hear the word neck, even if they hear femoral neck, and they'll think that it's up in the cervical spine, up in their neck. But actually, what we're talking about is that sort of area in the ball and socket joint where your leg bone meets your pelvis. That's a big one. Around your distal radius or your wrist. So if you look at the sort of long bones in your forearm, either the long bones here or as they kind of meet into your wrist, that's going to be one of the big issues, the aforementioned foosh injury. You have your lower spine, often lumbar spine, but I'm just going to say lower spine in general. We could see injuries there, and then also sometimes a lot of what we see in the spinal injury can be from novel loading or increase in volume and intensity of loading that area. So that's not always fall based. We can just kind of say lower spine in general. You can also see the shoulder, the proximal humerus. So basically, when the long bone in your arm meets your shoulder, there's a lot of small, delicate bones up there. That's quite a common one. And then as people get older, in 85 plus, then we really start worrying about the pelvis, the pelvic bones as well, which is something that tends not to be an issue for people in their 60s and lower 70s, but then does increase with time. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about common sites of injuries, because a lot of the literature, both where people measure bone density and quality, and then also where people measure the efficacy and effectiveness of different interventions and movements, it's going to be talking about these sites a lot. So these are the ones that we really want to think about. Um, the other thing I want to talk about is falls. Falls are complex. They're complicated. I'll say complex. And that's why I have this idea of falls versus underlined, italicized, bold, scare quotes, falls. And I think we all know what we mean. Like, I have a 6-year-old and he falls multiple times a day. Like, he can't get from one side of the field to the other without tumbling and rolling and getting up and laughing and maybe crying a little bit. And the difference between my 6-year-old falling and, my grandmother or one of my older relatives having a fall, we understand the implications are different there. So it's good just to talk a little bit about why. So the main conversation we're having today is this idea of bone density and quality. So for anyone here who's familiar with terms like osteoporosis and osteopenia, those are generally defined by reduced bone mineral density. Sometimes bone mineral density is kind of used as a shorthand for quantity, essentially how much bone mass do you have? There are other considerations, which I'll talk about in a second, which is quality. And without getting too much into it, we could just imagine like a Jenga tower. Imagine a Jenga tower that two Jenga towers that have the same amount of bricks, but one of them it looks like it's about to wobble and fall over, even though it's got the same amount of bricks as the other one. There could be structural issues that might make your bones more likely to break. And that could be all kinds of things, just from how the bone cells are organized, what they look like under a microscope. We don't need to worry about that, but just they are two different things, so it's worth talking about. So we got our bone density and quality. If you have low bone density, if you have a fall, there's a greater chance that you're going to have a fracture if you have a fall. Okay, but we also have to consider things like balance. Okay, if people are able to maintain their balance into later years, their chances of having a fall are going to be much lower. We also have to consider muscle strength and quality. So now we're talking about sarcopenia and also dynapenia, which is similar to when we talk about bone density and quality. Um, sarcopenia can be about muscle mass, but dynapenia is about the quality of that muscle, and that can help with all kinds of things, like obviously like strength. That can contribute to balance. It can contribute to reaction time if something happens. We also have to consider skill and movement quality. So even something like what does somebody's gait look like, which will obviously be dependent on balance, muscle strength and quality, mobility at the joints, things like that. But also things like falling skills. And when I talk about the fear of falling cycle, I'll bring this up as well. But you can be better or worse at falling depending on what kind of patterns and reactions you have if you do fall, when you do fall. Um, and if you watch, like, if I watch my 6-year-old fall, he is so limber, and he's just sort of like a little, in America we'd say he's kind of like a little Gumby. He's just, he's like a Jello mold. So he falls over and he just kind of rolls over and laughs. You don't see him stiffen up when he falls. Whereas someone as they get older, especially if the fear of falling increases, you see that classic stiffening up, reaching out when you fall, as opposed to rolling into it, which is something that can be taught and maintained. Um, Also, just confidence and movement and growth mindset. Giving people the tools so they have the confidence so they can actually feel like they can get better and they can participate more in the real world. The more opportunity people have to move out in the real world and solve movement problems and challenges, the better they're going to be overall if they do come to a situation where they might fall. And then finally, this idea of environment, which is something that you'll see there's a lot of NHS initiatives to come into people's homes and to see, do they have a rug that they might trip over? Is there an obstacle near a set of stairs? Are there steps that are unexpected in and out of the kitchen? Maybe like an increase or decrease in height, things like that. That can contribute to it. And there's really two ways of looking at it. We can either use those as opportunities to build capabilities, or we can see those as potential risk factors for falls, and both are valid. So this is just to say that falls are complex. One of the things I already referred to is this idea of the fear of falling cycle, which a lot of you might be familiar with. I just grabbed two off the internet, and you can see they're similar but slightly different. Um, I'll go ahead and refer to the one on the right. So, with the fear of falling cycle, the basic narrative is someone, possibly an older adult, has a fall. After they have that fall, they develop a fear they might fall again. Okay, because they're afraid of falling, we might see a decrease in physical activity. Because they are moving less, we might see a loss of muscle and bone strength, which could lead to all sorts of things like, oh, sorry,
Oh, so
maybe,
yeah, I'm just gonna get if you can just keep your microphones on mute, guys, for the moment.
cool. Um, So the loss of muscle and bone strength could lead to unstable gait. It could lead to loss of confidence, all sorts of things. We can see the classic shuffle that we associate with some older adults. Um, and even just that shuffle can increase the risk of fall, but then also things like stability, looking down instead of looking up, all these things contribute to having another fall. And, we can see if we look at the other one, the one on the left, um, we can see that as you lose bone density and things like that, that when you do have that next fall again, because you've lost that bone density, that muscle mass, things like that, the severity of the fall could increase, and it can create this sort of feedback loop of people becoming A, more fearful of a fall, B, more susceptible or more likely to fall, and then whatever the next number or letter in that order is of actually the severity of the fall increasing. So again, falls are a physical thing, but there is also this emotional and psychological element to them as well. So I want to talk a little bit about bone fragility, and this is a really important paper we have down here. I'll go ahead and give it to you. We'll give it to you later. But really talking about this idea of bone quality. So most of us in this call will probably be at least somewhat familiar with the measurement of bone mineral density. And like I said earlier, that measures bone quantity. It doesn't fully reflect bone quality. It's fine. You don't have to memorize the difference between the two, but it's just worth knowing. Bone strength depends on multiple interconnected factors, not just density. So, skeletal or skeletal fragility can occur due to issues in any of these factors, not just from low bone mineral density. So, it's important to know that while osteoporosis or osteopenia often causes fragility, fragility is not always due to osteoporosis as defined by low mineral density. Um, in a way, it's a subset of fragility, not necessarily a synonym. So, earlier I was saying that because it measures quantity, essentially the way that we establish this is we have a DEXA scan, which I might have. Oh, well, that was supposed to be a slide that had more information on it. I don't know where it went, but we generally use DEXA scans to establish bone mineral density, and because they're sort of simplified two-dimensional averages of a certain site, it doesn't really look at the difference, but between bone types, things like that. So it's important to also consider bone quality. Um, So when we're looking at bones, and this will be the last of the definitions before we get into the fun stuff, it's also good just to remember that there's different kinds of bones, or even in the same bone itself, we're going to have different kinds of bone tissues. So if you look at this picture, we have cortical bone versus trabecular bone, also known as spongy bone. So if you look at the long shaft, really, of either of these pictures, in the shaft, and this looks like a femur here, in the middle, in what's called the diaphysis, you're going to have this strong, structurally dense bone, what we think of as bone. But as you get a further end to either end of the bone, and what's called the epiphysis, as you get close to the growth plates and things like that, we have more of what's called trabecular bone or spongy bone. This tends to be much softer. So it's just good to know when we talk about the effects of impact and strength training that in the bone we have the diaphysis, which is the shaft of the bone, and then we have the epiphysis, which is the end. And they both have different needs and requirements in terms of what it takes in order to get them stronger. The other thing to consider, I'll go ahead and look at this femur right here. If you look at that little blue dot or the green dot, the greater and lesser trochanters, these are attachment sites for tendons and muscles. And a lot of times when we talk about resistance training, the parts of the bones that are closer or are going to feel the forces from the muscle insertions are going to get better benefit from resistance training, usually. So what we're talking about here is this idea of torsional load. So whenever you see the benefits of resistance training, often we're talking about the torsional load, which is, how much weight are you moving and how is that force or resistance directed through the bones, in addition to what's called axial loading. So for example, with a squat or something like that, how much compression do you have? So generally, trabecular bone is going to respond really, really well to impact. Not all the time, but what that means is if we look at the distal part of your wrist where we have those foosh injuries, or also the distal part of your shin or your tibia, those are going to do really, really well with impact. The long part of your bone, your diaphyses, your shafts are generally going to do better with resistance training. You can look at the attachment points on a bone to give an idea of what sort of torsional force we can expect, but there's certain parts of our bodies that aren't going to receive a lot of torsional force. So, for example, if we think of the neck of the femur, which we know is one of these most important sites, it doesn't really have any attachment points to it. So, it's really hard to get some of the benefits through torsional loading through resistance training. You might get some through axial loading through the weight that you're actually experiencing, but it means that it's a pretty good clue that we're going to need to get some additional impact training in. There are exceptions, so do both and don't get too reductionist. And the so what in this is, as with most things in life, a hybrid approach is probably best. So this means that we want to do a bit of progressive resistance training and a bit of progressive impact training. You want to start off deliberate. So what I mean is don't go overboard with impact training. You want to start off quite conservative, see how your body handles it, and then slowly increase the impact or the volume over time, but don't try to do too much too quickly because it's really just about giving your body this sort of nourishing stimulus. Um, yeah, start quite conservative, and then we can start branching out into real world challenges as confidence and capabilities expand. But what I'm saying is, while I would love to get everybody outside moving in the world and climbing over tree trunks and jumping and running and skipping, I think that is a great goal. You have to think about the population you're working with. And if you are working with people in their upper 70s and 80s and beyond, you do want to start quite conservative with the impact training before you start adding on too many variables. Um, what's the evidence, the main takeaways? So a combination of progressive resistance training and progressive impact training is going to be best. Some sites like the femoral neck, so that's that upper leg, your femur, as it goes into your pelvis, your hips, your distal radius, your wrist, your distal tibia, your shin, ankle area. They really benefit from impact training, both because of where they are in your body, and also possibly because of the type of bones that are there. Your lumbar spine, your lower back, is it generally really benefits from axial loading, so getting some sort of compressive weight that you might see in squats and deadlifts. That it's going to really benefit from that. Um, it can also benefit from impact training in terms of jumping and landing. So it kind of has unique needs, which means you just want to, again, go with a little bit of both. When we're talking about impact training, usually you'll see that we measure what are called ground reaction forces. So that's the impact your body makes with the ground. And usually that's done as a percentage of body weight. So we kind of generally want to eventually hit with three times your body weight. Walking usually only gets up to about 1.5. That's kind of walking on even ground. Running, depending on the style of running, your efficiency, the context is going to be about 2.5. Um, and a lot of what the research says is we sort of want to get people getting to about three times their body weight for impact training. Now, that is going to be relative. You want to think about what the minimal effective strain is. Also, Wolff's Law, essentially, you want to think about what kind of density and what kind of stress your body is used to. The good thing is that the less people are used to, the more is going to be stimulating. So we don't need to go out and get everybody, doing drop jumps or hitting this three, four, times ground reaction forces. If people aren't used to that, it means that actually their bodies will probably get benefit from lesser impact, lesser ground reaction forces, and we can slowly build them up to that. So don't get this impression that you need to start dropping from high heights. A sense check is usually pretty good. You think, does this feel like a good idea? If not, then maybe we can consider how we can progressively, gradually increase challenge there. The last thing to say here is yoga and Pilates and walking are really good for lots of things, but specifically in this context are not going to be enough for building bone mineral density for the most part. There really isn't any high quality evidence saying that's enough. Now, that being said, walking is a big term. If you're someone who puts on a backpack and you walk up and down hills and you scramble over rocks and you're going through the countryside, there's definitely going to be some benefit there. And, there are loads of benefits to participating in yoga and Pilates or other similar modalities. So by all means, do it. What I would say is if there is something that is active that you enjoy doing, keep on doing it. And then just find other ways to kind of work in some other beneficial stimulus into your life. Um, so again, everything we talk about, just keep this in the background that when we talk about falls and fall injuries, it is complex. So um, don't fall into that trap of being reductionist and just looking at bone density or just looking at muscle mass or just looking at balance or just looking at building up fall resiliency through fall training and rolling and things like that. The real answer is it's a little bit of everything. And this is where I think the playful movement and the natural movement really comes into its own. So it's great doing this in a gym environment. For a lot of people, a gym environment or a controlled home environment is going to be really, really good. But then if you want to start getting all those benefits, it is really nice to start working in other things down the road when it's appropriate. What does the evidence mean for you? Well, your skeleton doesn't need endless repetition. It wants brief, no novel, high impact signals. So that's one of the things that we want to consider as well. When we look at impact or when we look at what's sometimes called number of contacts, how much impact you actually work into a session. Sometimes people will see numbers like 60, 70, sometimes even up to 100 impacts per session or throughout the day. That's fine. You do not need to do. In fact, it's better not to do all those impacts all at once. The way your mechanoreceptors work, your body likes novel stimulus. So you're going to have much more benefit if you get those 100 repetitions in a set of 10, a little bit of rest, a set of 10, a little bit of rest, than doing the 100 all at once. And that's good because it's also going to reduce your chance of injury as you get fatigued. Um, so what I would say is aim for maybe about 50 or so deliberate impacts per session. So that would look like roughly 5 sets of 10 impacts. And what those impacts look like, we can talk about in a second. That's going to be different for everybody. Um, and then think about how you manage the intensity. So that's those ground reaction forces. How much forces is your body actually receiving? And then also, it's nice to think about variety, not variety for the sake of variety. What I mean is you don't just want to throw a lot of random things right away, but your body is going to benefit from novel and different kinds of stimulus. So down the road, we can start thinking about different forms of impact training, different angles, things like that. Don't just increase volume. Don't just think that if 100 is good, 200 is better, 300 is best. That is something that you can work up to over time, but take into consideration all these other factors. So I want to open this back up to Jill again as we talk about this. Let me just switch back so I can see. Hi, Jill. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm coming. Hang on.
Cool.
I was just trying to put a spotlight on me. Okay. So just to oversimplify all of the research, we thought it would be good. I mean, the lower body impact research, generally speaking, kind of sets itself into these four different options. And so you have a lot of options to find your entry point to impact. And I think the most important takeaway from this call is that finding an option that feels okay and manageable to you right now is really important. Some people will be jumping off things no problem. Others on the call will not have done any of this for a long time. So again, going back to that slide, it's better to start with abundance of caution. But if we look at these four options, we'll just do a kind of worked example. And again, we've got links to our YouTube channel at the end, so you can actually see what these things look like. So don't worry if you don't know what any of these mean. We've got heel drops, which we can work up, and we'll look at that in a second. You've got jump extensions, which is just sort of a fancy way of saying vertical jumping, so jumping up and down. You've got these drop jumps, which is jumping off something. And again, the research. Oh, I get back in.
Sorry.
Where have you gone? Uh, the research around the drop jumps is working up to about a 20 centimeter drop, but again, don't get bogged down in the details on this. The way that they researched it was a kind of drop off something and then a rebound. You don't need to do it like that. They did it like that because if you're dropping rather than jumping off something, then you can research the ground reaction force. Have a much tighter gauge on it. And then you've got gait patterns, by which we mean marching, skipping, hopping, and that kind of moves you over into kind of things you can do on your walk or around your house. So if you just go to the next slide, Andrew. Um, so again, what this means for you, it's worth remembering that these measurements are all relative. So everything changes depending on your body type, how and where you carry out these movements. So if I'm doing what we're about to do some heel drops, if I do heel drops on a hard surface indoors, I can create more impact. If I do them outside, because it's a nice sunny day, there'll be less impact, but I'm outside having a nice time. So maybe that's a good thing to think about. Again, what matters is gradually adding impact that your body can handle over time, and where you start will depend on where you are right now. And so we really want to emphasize that you want to build this up slowly over time. So we'll just do a worked example all together. Go on to the next thing. Okay, so heel drops. This is a good starting point. If you haven't done anything, all you're going to need to do is stand up where you are. It's been quite hard to demonstrate on screen, but we're going to give it a go.
Yeah. Nice if you have either a
You
chair
or a
or a
wall or
wall.
something to hold on to. So I'm going to hold onto the wall here, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to come up onto my tiptoes to a height that feels manageable to me. So if you haven't done these before, just go low. You're going to raise your heels, and then you're going to come down, trying to keep your legs straight. So there is a bit of an impact, and you can kind of feel a bit of a body shudder, and you're just dropping down with straight legs. Now, Andrew and I are in agreement. We don't love these for multiple reasons, because there's very few times in your life that you're going to be doing this, but they are very effective at starting impact training. You can do them really safely. So how high you raise your heels, you can start really low, and then over time you could raise your heels. But if we're looking at how we could start building complexity in each of these movement categories with heel drops. It's good to think now, okay, does this feel manageable to you right now? If you think actually this is quite easy, I could do 10, no problem. Um, you can think about how you could add impact with this movement. So, for the example of the heel drop, and then again, remember we've got YouTube videos on these, but with the heel drop, you could raise your heels higher and come down with more force. You can start moving away from the wall, so you don't need the support of the wall. You could start doing it more vigorously. So we talk about in one of the videos how you can start doing these with a bit of weight as well. Um, but it's well, and then ultimately, how could you use these within a real world application? Now, the heel drops they're not very real worldy, but they are nice and easy to measure for researchers. So that's kind of why they
Yeah.
tend to be the standard.
May I jump in?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, Jill alluded to this, and I think it's important to look at is it's like I said earlier. Sometimes what we're doing is we're translating evidence and research into the real world. And heel drops are really popular because it's very easy to measure the impact. It's very easy to keep consistent impact. It's very easy to adjust it, you know. So as long as you sort of account for how hard the floor is, what kind of shoes you're wearing, how high up you're going, it's very easy to get this consistent impact. And if you've done a few, if you notice, because this isn't how we really land, if I was going to jump, I wouldn't land on my heels with straight legs. You feel that jostle going up and down your body. On one hand, that's very nice because we know that we're getting this impact. On the other hand, I do think it's nice to get real world things where you are actually practicing landing in a real environment. So the heel drops are great because they're sort of quantifiable and controllable, but they're one of those things that they're very much used as like this sort of first way of measuring or introducing impact. But then really, I think that once you get comfortable with those, it's much more fun and interesting to start bringing other ones, as Jill said.
So actually, if you're an architect, Elizabeth says that she uses them to test floor stability in old buildings. So very real world.
There you go. Very useful. You can check a dance floor
You could check
to
it out
see
still.
how, yeah.
Anyway, just wanted to take one of those movement options, and again, we've got links at the end for how you can progress all of these. But just to give you an idea of where you can start and how you can kind of think, is this actually okay for me right now? I'm going to stay here, or how could I start adding complexity? And that's kind of how we want to think about all of these movement categories. If you can go on to the next slide, Andrew.
Mhm.
So and again, Andrew touched on this as well. The research points to trying to get in 50 to 70 impact repetitions 3 times a week. Do you need to do that this week? No. That's something to, just as a kind of, that's where we want to work up to. If you're starting from nothing, these are just numbers. But again, looking at not high repetitions, so not trying to bash out 50 in one go, thinking about maybe 10 repetitions, go and do something else. So with the heel drops, that's quite a nice way in. You could do 10 heel drops while you're boiling a kettle, go and do something else and come back. Again, these are not set in stone, just use them as a guide, don't get bogged down in the numbers. As we've said, like the most important thing here is to find impact options that feel manageable to you right now and that you're not jumping in at the deep end. Hey, nice
A lot
pun.
of good puns in
I
this.
know, so many.
There's a good one in the chat too. I'll
Uh,
acknowledge later. Someone made a good one.
I mean, there's just endless jump puns. Right, on you go. Next slide. Okay, so now we're heading into upper body. I'm going to hand back to Andrew. Can
Okay,
you stop spotlighting me?
cool.
Yes.
Um, So one of the things I was saying is we're very lucky in that we have a time now where we have very good quality evidence on both resistance training and impact in terms of bone quality and density. Um, and we are starting to get lucky with upper body. So one of the tricky things, and actually one of the things that can get a bit confusing, is if you look at the efficacy of impact training in upper body, there are some meta-analyses out there where people have looked at the efficacy of impact training and sort of what they've done, sometimes the way that the studies are designed, they will look at the bone density or some other marker, say in the hip or say in the distal tibia and the shin or something like that. And they'll check to see if the bone quality or density increased. And, there's a preponderance of studies now that show that they do. But then sometimes as as a control site, they would measure the wrist or the distal radius to see if the impact increased there. And obviously, okay, if you are only doing lower body impact, unless there's some big systemic, advantage, you're not going to get increased bone density in your forearm. Okay, and that seems pretty obvious, but that's a little confusing sometimes because if you were going to go into like say ChatGPT or something like that and say, does impact work for upper body, you might see something that says no, it doesn't. Because we have this meta-analysis and we could see that bone quality and density and the distal radius didn't increase with impact training. That's often because people were looking at lower body impact training. They weren't doing a lot of specific stuff in upper body impact training. But now, again, the last 10 years, we're starting to get some good studies, some actual interventions, randomized controlled trials, things like that, that actually look at it. And what we found is that, yes, there is some research in upper body impact, not a huge amount, but we can say that it does upper body impact training does have a significant advantage. So one of the biggest ones you'll see people refer to a lot is the Optima X study, where they were looking at sort of the efficacy of resistance training versus impact training. Um, these off the top of my head, I don't believe they're older adults, but what we find is even though you need to take a population age into account, that the tendency and benefits is usually about the same. And what they were doing is they were looking at upper body impact training and lower body impact training. What they had is they had the participants actually do some boxing and boxing style exercises, so like punching, different styles of punches. And I think I don't have this on me, but I think they saw something like a 6% increase in the measurement of bone density at the distal radius, which is actually incredible and really impressive for a relatively short-term study. So we can see this, and we have other studies with younger participants and different participants. So we know that upper body impact is effective. Um, and we can start making educated guesses about how your bones might respond to this impact, what sort of intensity and ground reaction forces we need. Again, when we're talking about osteogenesis, when we're talking about laying down more bone tissue, we kind of want to think about, well, what is the minimal effective stimulus? And because the bones in the upper body tend to be smaller and less used to receiving stress, it means we don't need to try to recreate those same ground reaction forces. So just because if we're working from what we have with lower body stuff saying, oh, you need 20 centimeters, you need 11 inches or whatever, you do not need to be doing falls from that height in order to see benefits. And I can't say that 100% because I don't think there's a study out there that measures it specifically, but I think the tendency of the information that we have, we can see that you can benefit from relatively lower overall ground reaction forces and still see benefits here. The other thing I want to point out is there is lots of good quality evidence with grip strength. Um, so grip strength is strongly linked to wrist forearm bone density, which is one of the reasons why when we're working on a program where we want to increase bone density, we will have people do things like farmer's carries, suitcase carries, any kind of grip training because that torsional um, force is going to help increase bone density around the forearm and wrist. So that's another thing to consider. So the short thing is, yes, we can do impact, and just like with the lower body impact, all you want to have all the same considerations. So you want to start off nice and conservative. You don't want to do too much right away. In general, you can do slightly less force and then slowly bring it in. And also, there's lots of different ways to do it. So again, we have these videos that you can go check out. But a nice way whenever you're doing impact stuff, rather than starting with the ground, you can start with the wall, and you can do just different variations of wall pushaways. And just as we have with the heel drops, you can either try to go with a stiff arm, which I just don't think feels very good, but you can get a little bit of that. You can also work on absorbing a little bit of energy back and forth. So you can do all kinds of things against the wall. Then gradually you can move down to the ground. You can do ground pushaways, plank to elbow work. We really like to get members in our communities to start doing some form of locomotion. So if possible, maybe working on crawls, maybe some baby crawls, moving around in a quadruped position, because that's going to get lots of nice benefits. Um, you can also do ballistic stuff. So you can do like throwing and catching weights and things like that, which we don't generally do in our environment, with the exception of maybe some medicine balls and softer things like that, but you get the impact there. Um, We do know that well-designed boxing and boxing fitness programs will probably have some benefits depending on that. Now, if you look at the way that police officers are taught to punch, they're usually taught to punch with a palm like this, just because that is generally safer. It takes all the small bones out of the hand. So if you did want to get in some boxing, you could do some impact things like that. So if you have a like a bag or something suspended, you could hit that, which is all. We also have a video talking about that. And then also just because it can be quite hard to get enough volume and enough different forms of stimulus just from the impact. And remember, as with both of these things, the impact and the resistance training are complementary. Some form of loaded carries or grip work are going to be beneficial there as well. So check out our videos for more detail on that. Um, what this means for you? Well, worth remembering these measurements are relative. Everything changes depending on body type, how and where you carry out these movements, your history of movement, where you are right now in terms of your bone density. What matters is gradually adding impact your body can handle and not adding too much too quickly. Remember, when we're talking about impact training, we're talking about progressing over months, not just trying to add in, an extra 1 inch of height from your impact training every week. That's not going to be an appropriate level of progression. Where you start will depend on your body and where you are right now on your impact journey and building up slowly over time. So we can do a worked example here if you want to, if you have access to a wall or something like that, standing a few feet away from the wall with your arms out in front of you, or if you really want to start conserve, you can start off with your hands right here. You can just practice pushing yourself off the wall, and then what you can do is you can just go ahead and practice just different levels of absorbing it. So at first, if I'm going really light, I'll bring this down a little bit. I can bring my elbows and the rest of my body into it and sort of create like a spring and push away. That's going to be very gentle. And then just like with the heel drops, I can gradually focus on more of a stiff arm movement, which will get a bit more wrist like that. Now, again, this isn't the only way to do it, but this is just a nice way to start getting it in. One of the benefits of the lower body impact is you can start working and crawling and stuff like that, which can be beneficial for other reasons if it's appropriate. So I really like that because that really opens up the opportunities for locomotion and moving and having fun with that. And that tends to be much more interesting for people than just doing that. But you can start off with that, see how it feels, and then look at some of the other options as your confidence grows and as you have a better sense of what's a good match for your body. Jill, do you want to hop back in here?
Yeah, I just put in a few slides that I know will come up in the questions. Before we get into the questions, hang on a minute. Andrew, you can also jump in on here. It's just we often get a lot of questions around is impact training safe if you've got osteoporosis? Um, yes, we'd advise you to speak to your GP first. But yet again, as with all of these things, you want to start very cautiously and really build up over months rather than weeks. So with all of the options that we look at in the YouTube videos, you want to start with kind of the first option, which in this case are the two that we looked at on the call, which is the wrists against the wall, and for the lower body, looking at the heel drops. And remember, low repetition, so maybe 10 and have a rest. You don't need to try and hit this 50 to 70 a day, a week, sorry, let's say a day. When you first start, you just really need to kind of listen to your body, feel where you are, and go very cautiously. The next question that we will get, and actually we've already got it in the comments, is what about rebounders? Rebounders are great for all sorts of things, for balance and confidence, getting your heart rate up. But the trampoline bed absorbs a lot of the most of the shocks, so the forces on your bones are much lower than if you are doing something on a hard surface like heel drops or drop jumps or skipping or marching. So trampolining on its own probably won't reach the kind of ground reaction force that you need to build bone density. That's not to say stop doing it. Just don't do it for bone density.
Yeah, if I could jump in on this one too, just like Jill said, rebounding trampolining is great. It's fun. It's good for conditioning. You can get your heart rate up. It's great for balance. It's sort of a nice thing to do. I've seen lots of people make arguments that there's other benefits for your lymphatic system and things like that, which is outside of my remit, but that could all make sense. One of the funny things about rebounding is a lot of times, I think it's from the 80s, I want to say mid 80s, NASA did a study that gets referenced all the time because They were experimenting with rebounders with obviously astronauts up in space, who essentially were getting no impact, no gravity, no axial loading, and things like that. And we all know that when people spend too much time up in space, they have this reduced bone density. Unfortunately, there aren't any real modern quality studies, and even that they were sort of comparing the rebounding against nothing. Um, so that's not to say there are no benefits to rebounding, but there's not really any good quality evidence. And there's also just biomechanical reasons why rebounding by itself is not enough, though I do like it and it's perfectly good to do. And as Jill said, if you like something, keep on doing it. But just consider other ways that you can supplement that.
Okay, and then the next one I think is just links. Oh yeah. So what else? I mean, as much as anything, go outside and participate in physical and social opportunities around you. So if you're gardening or you're dancing or you're walking, keep doing all of that because real life activities have so many benefits that are very difficult to quantify in these papers and are probably just as important. And then when possible, you can start trying to get your impact in, whether that's heel drops or marching or skipping or dancing. And you can try and do maybe sort of walking over challenging terrain as well. Next slide, please. There we go. Next steps. So you can rewatch this and take notes. We will circulate the recording and you can download the slides. Most importantly is to find a way that you can slot it into your life that's kind of meaningful to you right now and finding that entry point. So we will all be at different entry points. And the main message to take away from this call is that impact is important, but we need to find an entry point that feels manageable now and look at how we can slowly over months start increasing that. Next one, Andrew.
There's Hippocrates
There we
again.
go. There he is. I think we've said that a
Yeah,
lot, but yeah, just take
same
your
idea.
time. Think about gradual progression, um, and don't jump before you can. Anyway, that's fine. On you go.
Okay.
Uh, these are the main resources for you after the call. So there's a playlist on Impact. That QR code will take you there. You don't need to do this now. We will send this to you so you can do it later. Oh, it's a podcast with a missing T.
It's a hidden T. It's jumped
Oh,
off.
yeah,
It's done some impact training in the QR code.
there are some really good episodes on the podcast, particularly one
Biased.
with, well, with Alison Crouch, which is very good on osteoporosis and bone density. But there's also a couple that we did early on. And then we've got another one of these webinars, which was on strength training, which we ran in June last year. And now we've updated and we'll be running again in February, which you're very welcome to join. Okay, we're going to go from here straight in to the questions, and I appreciate.
Should we start at the top?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. First off, hello to everyone who said hello. So hello over in Norfolk and Lancashire. Um, oop, taking
Shall I
notes.
read them out, Andrew? Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you want
I know
to.
that Claire is gone, but we'll answer her question because she will
Okay.
the
Yeah,
recording.
let's go with that.
She'd be interested to know uh, with a long-term injury in my ankle and wrist 12 years ago, what the best means of exercise movement to avoid
Uh,
later issues in life.
it would depend on the injury. So it's kind of hard to say. Um, I mean, no matter what, most people are going to benefit from any kind of grip training. Grip strength is often used as a proxy for overall health. So I'm not saying that if you get your grip really strong, it's going to mean that you will live a longer, happier life. But having high grip strength is very much correlated with capabilities into older age. It's largely because it just sort of implies that someone is active and they're strong overall. So working on grip strength is always going to be beneficial. Not knowing about the injury. I can't really say much more than that, but you just remember that your body is very good at adapting, and if you can find forms of impact that feel like a good match for you, it's probably better to have some form of stimulus than avoid it altogether. It's just going to be a matter of working with your body and seeing what goes. So, for example, maybe heel drops, maybe they feel good, maybe they don't. Maybe if you try the loading so you can do some side loading, we have videos on that. You just really want to find something that works for you that feels like a good match. Our bodies are complex things. As we get older, we might accumulate different injuries or histories or whatever. It doesn't mean that you should stop. It just means that you need to find ways to kind of get a little bit of stimulus, a little bit of movement, nutrition, in ways that work for you that are sustainable.
Okay. Question from Rebecca. Is this the same for Pilates with springs? So like reformer.
Yeah, so this will be if you join in on our resistance training webinar we'll be doing in the future, we'll answer this. But generally, when we're talking about resistance training intensities for osteogenesis for bone health, we are looking at something that is approximately 80-85% of a one rep max, which sounds confusing, but it sort of needs to be for the most part, especially once you get used to it. Maybe not right away when you first start, almost anything will be beneficial, but as you spend more time and you're really looking for ways to progress, you sort of want to find a movement that is challenging enough so you can do it about maybe 6, 7 times before you need a rest. But if you're working in a rep range where you can do things 12, 15 times or hold that position for like 30 or 40 seconds, it's probably not going to be the level of intensity that we need for bone density. So while working with reformers and other forms of spring resistance and pulleys and novel ways of using body weight, oftentimes it's not going to pass that osteogenic threshold. But again, it's going to be really good. It's going to have benefits for balance and strength and stability and all these other things. But probably it's going to mean that A, people are going to need some sort of impact training. Again, whatever works for them. And then B, probably just a very basic progressive resistance, that has a lot of the classic movements, a form of squatting, a form of hinging and picking things up, some pushing and some pulling. It doesn't need to be complicated, but just enough so you have that progressive element of adding weight over time so that your body can adapt. Well, this was a good one. How does impact, thanks, Rebecca, impact the pelvic floor or impact exercises safe for pelvic floor? Not strong. Again, this is a complicated one because pelvic floor can be a big issue depending on people's history. For all kinds of things. Have you given birth? Are there any injuries you've had? Any other complications? Um, Jumping in general can be challenging on the pelvic floor. And this is one of those things that is probably good to work with a specialist in conjunction whatever else you're doing. As with heavy resistance training can be challenging. As with most things, if you can find a balance, so that you can get what's called a eustress, you can get benefit stress out of this that can strengthen it. But it's gonna be one part. If you are someone who has pelvic floor issues, I'd really recommend that you work with a specialist to get to the bottom of that. Um, that being said, there are different levels of intensity of impact training. This might be an example where the heel drops are actually a good match because the heel drops, you can really maximize the bone stress that your body is receiving without that same stress of having the big landings or the big jumps. So again, finding that.
There is also a good webinar on our YouTube on pelvic floor training as
I
well,
think
which
one of our
is
coaches, Brett.
Brett. Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
this is a good question from Yvonne. What type of exercise impact axial resistance does the shoulder, the proximal humerus want? So this is a few things. What you're really going to benefit from here is going to be fall training and just getting better at rolling and things like that. Because a lot of times the shoulder falls where someone just falls on. That's going to be partially falling technique. Mainly because you have these little bones up here around your clavicle, your acromion, your glenohumeral joint that are really, really, really small. And one of the big things is you just generally don't want to fall on top of them. So all the bone density in the world isn't going to help if you flip over and smash into your shoulder just because it's going to be big impact. Now that being said, doing various forms of pressing and pulling are going to be beneficial as well because there are lots of muscles around here, so we can get the torsional benefit. So I would say some variation of a progressive overhead press if that feels good for you, some variation of a progressive pull, of a vertical pull, probably a little bit of horizontal as well. in terms of impact, you can't really do too much, but I would say if you or the person you're working with is at the point in their life where they can learn rolling, gymnastics, or martial arts style rolling, parkour style rolling, that's going to have a lot of benefit. And then you are going to get some impact, some general impact benefits through that as your body gets more used to it. Yes. Scottish
Scottish
country
country dancing.
dancing
Yeah.
is great. It's great. It's Scottish country dancing ticks so many boxes in terms of social, movement confidence, impact, moving. If I didn't say balance, it's absolutely great.
Neuroplasticity from learning the new patterns and constantly having to learn the patterns and navigate other people, dynamic balance, all sorts.
Yeah. So if you live somewhere where Scottish country dancing is an option, absolutely do it. Especially if you live up in Scotland like we do in the cold Scottish winters, and it's nice to go out somewhere and meet people and get warm. So absolutely, that's a great example of one of those things. If you're doing it, keep on doing it. Absolutely. I would say regular Scottish country dancing. I would rather you do that than whatever. Go to leisure center once a week. To use I don't know, whatever the cable machine. It's just because it has so many other benefits.
Um,
Elizabeth, good comment. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to read the next question is what does the size of improvement with impact and resistance training compare to osteoporosis medication?
Is that the next one? We've got one from Vanda.
And
Oh, Vanda has a comment. Okay,
yeah,
check. Okay. How does the size of improvement with impact resistance training compare to osteo? So they're different, and it depends on the kind of medication. And this is sometimes while that bone geometry, bone microarchitecture, bone quality conversation is really important because different drugs will sort of elicit different forms of growth. So what I would say is rather than either or, all these things really have a multiplicative effect in terms of efficacy. Just as with, a lot of the GLP weight loss, they work much better in conjunction with movement and strength training and things like that. Um, so with the impact and resistance training, they can really give very robust, statistically significant results. In some trials, depending what you're measuring, there are some drug interventions that might do better on things like overall bone density, especially at certain sites, maybe like lumbar spine and femoral neck. There's some really good results from there. But actually, it doesn't tell the whole picture because it does look like the actual quality and the microarchitecture is going to be really, really is going to benefit from actually moving and using your body. So I would use them, complementary. Because they really are. So if there is someone who is doing some form of medication, really, really finding appropriate exercises is just going to take it up to the next level. So don't think of it as either or, think of them as complementary. But the big thing is that a lot of the early studies on the medication just looked at bone mineral density, and what we really need to do is we also need to look at quality there. Trampoline, we talked about that. Loaded carries,
um,
good question. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I said for loader carries, I said we have some videos on it, but ultimately it means carrying something with a handle so that you're gripping it either in one
Mhm.
hand or both.
Yeah. So imagine you've just gone grocery shopping and you're really stubborn and you don't want to go back to the car multiple times or you don't want to use the trolley and return it. So you grab a bunch of shopping bags in one hand and a bunch of shopping bags in the other hand. And as you're walking, your grip starts to get tired. You think, whoa, this is pretty hard. It's doing that in a systematic way, whether with a bucket or a kettlebell or a towel with some weights tied around it. It's literally just walking with some weight in your hands in this case. So just imagine heavy shopping bags and then going from there.
I'm just skimming. Somebody said knees. We haven't mentioned knees. Any advice on knee injuries and if impact training helps?
Sorry, I'm just looking at what Lou's saying about the trampoline. I have a detached retina. These are apparently on the increase in older people. Oh, interesting. I hadn't heard that. Thank you for sharing. Um, let's see. What was the next question, Jill? Oh,
Knees.
knees. Yeah, so regarding knees, Mark, that's a good question. It also sort of depends on what the limitations are. So a lot of times, we're looking at knees. A lot of times what we might be talking about are different forms of arthritis or possibly inflammation. And the thing to remember is that all the best quality recent evidence, from organizations like Versus Arthritis, et cetera, is going to be that you want to get some kind of movement because it's beneficial. Thinking about motion is lotion, use it or lose it, things like that. So we never want to go 100% full avoidance. What we want to do is we want to find a level of stimulus that's beneficial for us. So that does mean things like finding some form of knee dominant movement, whether it's squats or step ups or sit to stand or something that's going to be beneficial for you there. In terms of the impact as well, it's very much just getting a sense of what is a good match and what's a bad match for you. So for example, if you do the heel drops, there's very little knee bend, so the stress that's going through your system is going to be kinetic, but it's not going to put much stress on the mobility of the joint. So for some people, that might be a good match. For other people, it might not be. So for some people, they might benefit from having a bit of a knee bend. Some people, maybe they won't. Um, Same thing if you look at some of the gait stuff we're doing with like you can't see it right now, but I'm moving my feet really quickly, sort of like a little leprechaun or something. That's quite low impact, but you can get quite high repetition counts, so that might be a good match for you. So I can't absolutely say that it's good or bad. Really, the question is can we find a form of stimulus and a dosage and a level of intensity that feels like a good match without overdoing it? And just remember, with all these things, what we're doing is you're providing your body with some stimulus so it has a signal to lay down more tissue, whether it's, tendon, muscle, ligament, bone, or whatever. You introduce that stimulus, you give your body a little bit of a rest, and it's going to respond by adapting to whatever that stress is. So it's just going to be that kind of dance of providing enough stimulus so your body adapts, and then gradually over time, playing around with that level of stimulus and rest so you can continue to make progress over time. So, rather than saying something is good or bad, really what we want to do is we want to explore that space and see what's a good match for you.
Um, I think the last one is from Tracy about backwards walking. Do you think it would be
Mhm.
useful in terms of impact? We love a backwards walk and a backwards march, and a backwards skip and a backwards crawl. Any of the stuff that kind of gets your brain feeling like you can actually feel the cogs going. Yeah, so I think we would often do in our classes, we'll do forwards marches, and then if it's a confident group, we'll try doing backwards marches. So you could look at the kind of backwards marching and skipping if
Yeah, and then
backwards gait.
sometimes if I'm going up a big hill, um, and I feel my knees and everything start to get tired, sometimes I'll flip around and I'll walk up the hill backwards. We've got Largo Law around here. I got halfway up. I noticed that my knees get a bit cranky. So I'll just turn around and walk backwards, and that feels very nice on my knees and ankles. So backwards walk up an incline if it's safe, and you know where you're going is good. The other thing that we do quite a lot in our classes is we get lots of old tires, just regular large car tires, and we just tie a strap around or drill a little eyelet, and we do a lot of backwards resisted walking. So the friction of the tire adds a little bit of resistance, and that feels great. That's a really nice movement. I think there's lots of benefits, and I think that adding variety is always going to be great as long as you have enough consistency to make sure that you're actually seeing progress. But yes, I think backwards walking is great. All right, I
That's
think
it.
that's everybody.
Well done. Thanks everyone for staying to the end.
Yeah, thanks for all the
Try
questions.
and
Bye, Gabby.
put a very complex topic into a 1 hour webinar.
Yeah.
Maybe next time I'll treat us all to an hour and a half webinar so that we don't run over. We will be sharing everything probably tomorrow. Okay, thanks very
All right.
much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the
Have a good
great comments and
afternoon.
questions.
Hope
Really
it's not
appreciate
as
it.
miserable weather as it is here.